trial lasting over a year, 7 policemen in Hong Kong have been sentenced to 2 years in jail after assaulting an activist at the Occupy Central protests of 2014. But the sentences have become highly controversial, not least because they were handed down by a British-born judge. So is it the system or the policemen involved who are basically at fault? And as some Western countries continue calling on China to rein in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea for its continued nuclear and missile tests, is it reasonable to expect China to burden the full responsibility to bringing its neighbour to account? Welcome to The Point. I'm Liu Xi. As usual, we start with the world at a glance. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and his U.S. counterpart, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, met on the sidelines of a gathering of foreign ministers at the G20 in Bonn, Germany. And they agree that the two countries should work together for greater development of bilateral relations during President Donald Trump's term. Now, the meeting was the first of its kind since Tillerson assumed office. Wang Yi noted that China and the U.S. had more common interests than disputes, and that China is ready to work with the U.S. side to implement the consensus reached between U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping and move their bilateral ties forward in a direction that features no conflict or confrontations. The meeting appears to have been pragmatic and indicates that key mechanisms such as the China-US strategic and economic dialogue will continue in previous or similar forms. These talks further clarify the new US administration's China policies. Many international issues, including the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue, will need renewed coordination between China and the US, and these reaffirmations can only help dismiss widespread doubts that had crept in since Donald Trump took office. And separately, U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin has held separate phone calls with Chinese Vice Premier Wang Yang, the Chinese Minister of Finance and the Governor of the People's Bank of China, China Central Bank, and the Minister of the Office of the Central Leading Group on Financial and Economic Affairs. In each of these phone calls, Mnuchin stressed that he looked forward to fostering strong U.S.-China ties, emphasizing the importance of achieving a more balanced bilateral economic relationship. This is all in stark contrast again to remarks made in the U.S. presidential campaign, in which Donald Trump had heavily criticized China for harming American companies and consumers by devaluating the Chinese currency, the renminbi yuan. China had responded that it has never used this currency as a tool to gain an advantage in trade and was not seeking a currency war. Together with the meeting I just mentioned between Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and his U.S. counterpart Tillerson, these are encouraging signs that Sino-American relations have improved steadily will improve steadily in the coming months, rather than nosedive as had been feared immediately after Trump's election. It is also looking increasingly possible that Presidents Xi and Trump will probably get together for a meeting, perhaps as early as July. As always, we'll just have to wait and see. Our first topic in the spotlight. 7 Hong Kong policemen have been sentenced to 2 years each for beating a protester during the 2014 Occupy Central rallies. The sentence was announced last week as opposing groups gathered outside the courtroom to protest in support of and against the verdict. Exactly what happened? Let's watch this first.
The verdict came after the police were convicted earlier of assault causing actual bodily harm for an attack on an activist surnamed Zhang following his arrest. The incident in this case took place more than 2 years ago during the Occupy Central demonstrations, which have deeply scarred the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region and made some worry about its stability. The rallies have also added enormously to pressure on the police to maintain Hong Kong's rule of law, but their misconduct sent the opposite message to what they're trying to preserve. Online and local TV video clips show what happened that day. According to a prosecution case last year, Chang splashed smelly liquid on police as they tried to clear demonstrators from a tunnel at that time. Chang himself was later sentenced to 5 weeks in prison for assaulting and resisting officers. In the policeman's case, the officers were found to have carried Chang by his arms and legs to behind a park building where they dumped him on the ground and assaulted him. The judge said 5 officers stabbed, stamped, and kicked Chang, while 2 others watched. The policeman's case was brought to court last June and has since sparked strong and mixed social reactions.
For Chang's aggressive behavior, police could arrest him and take him to court, but they had no right to take him into a corner with his hands and feet bound and beat him. That's deliberately breaking the law. Police are always asked to bear everything patiently. Some people may resist arrest and even attack police, but legal penalties for them are light and even non-existent. Is that fair?
When I was with the police, residents honored and respected us, but now they are so hostile. The 7 policemen were immediately arrested and jailed. That's not fair. Usually lawbreakers can seek bail and appeal.
For more insight, I'm joined by Ting-Wan Casey, a barrister at law and executive counsellor of the China-Australia Legal Exchange Foundation. Casey, thank you very much for joining me today. Now, all seven of the Hong Kong police officers have been jailed for 2 sentences. Could you explain to us first, what are the reasons behind the judge's sentencing?
Actually, first of all, I'm very glad to join tonight's program, Liu Xin. Actually, I have the judge's reason for sentence with me. Let me refer to the judgment and to ensure accuracy. The main reasons is the operation of the doctrine, common law doctrine of joint enterprise. And the rule of joint enterprise means this rule imputes the criminal liability to all participants in a joint enterprise and for all their resulting offenses. And other reasons are, first, they are all serving police officers on duty. Secondly, the series of the injury sustained by Mr. Zhang, and thirdly, Mr. Zhang was handcuffed behind his back. He was effectively a defenseless individual. And lastly, the damage to Hong Kong's reputation. Those are the main reasons, Liu Xin.
Now, we know that last year, Mr. Tang, the protagonist of the incident, was also sentenced 5 weeks, and he was found guilty of attacking and resisting officer on the same evening. But he was accused of splashing an unknown liquid on police and was handed a 5-week sentence. What are the reasons behind the judge's sentencing in that case? And could we compare these 2 sentences?
First, he was watching from high positions above the road in Central, and when Hong Kong police advanced into a tunnel to try to clear out the protesters. And second point is he was pouring the unknown liquid onto the police below. And that material time, Mr. Zhang, was also not in possession of his Hong Kong identity card. So those points, the totality view of those points indicate that he had committed a very serious offense against the police force in Hong Kong. And in comparison with the 7 police officers' sentence, Mr. Zhang's he was charged with 2 offenses, which are quite different from police charges. And different criminal offenses have their respective different criminal sanctions. I would say these like cases should not be treated alike, and there is no meaningful comparisons to make any comparison between them.
Right now, the chief of the Hong Kong Police, Commissioner Stephen Low, has indicated that the 7 policemen might appeal or are getting ready to appeal. What would happen then?
Actually, it really depends on the decision of those police officers whether or not to launch an appeal against their verdict. Actually, now I don't have a crystal ball to say what's the possible impact. However, if a defendant, if a police officer appeal against sentence, that would provide the Court of Appeal in Hong Kong a second chance to revisit the police sentence. And that the main ground is that the sentence of 2 years in immediate custodial sentence is manifestly excessive. And if the police officers appeal against conviction, then the judges in the Court of Appeal would have to look into the entire trial proceeding, and that is much more complicated appeal procedure.
Yes.
So that is
yeah.
Yes.
One of the things that many people on the mainland are asking is why there are so many foreign judges in Hong Kong. And what is the background here, very briefly? Are we seeing the increased percentage of foreign judges in Hong Kong over the past 20 years, or things have been steady? Very briefly, please.
Let's start from the very top to the Court of Final Appeal. According to Basic Law, Article 82, that the Court of Final Appeal can invite foreign judges to sit in the Court of Final Appeal to hear Hong Kong cases. And further down to the hierarchy, we can see the Basic Law Article number 92. Other judges can be recruited in accordance with their professional and judicial experience. And also there's another avenue that foreigners in Hong Kong who have gained the Hong Kong citizenship, they can, after a few years, they can apply to the judiciary and they can become a judge at the bench. So those avenues are possibility that they can come to Hong Kong to practice as a judge. So that is quite a lot of possibilities that they can come. Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much, Casey, joining us from Hong Kong. That was Ting Wan Casey. Now, to understand the situation from a different perspective, we are also joined in Hong Kong by Li Si-ing, convener of the Alliance in Support of Our Police Force. Li Si-ing, thank you very much for joining us today. First of all, how did you feel about the sentence when it was handed down that all of these police officers were given 2 years each for what they did?
For me to say the sentencing is really not fair, and we are shocked, we are sad, and of course some of the supporters, they even cried and feeling heartache. And so, but right now we all know that they are filing for an appeal. So we will give our full support and blessings for the 7 amazing policemen.
Now, some people are saying the sentencing, contrary to what you just said, some people believe the sentencing was fair because the policemen, as enforcement of the law, they should respect the law themselves. What is your reaction to that?
But we have to look into the situation, the reality. At that time, it was during the period of Occupy Central. And our policemen, they were under tremendous pressure. Limited resources, long working hours, and you can see the rioters, protesters, talking about Kanzang, pouring those smelly liquid, or we came to know that maybe urine, and this is really bad and impolite, and this is something that we understand how come the policemen reacted in this way. And
yes.
But one thing that we have to remember is yes.
Yes, please go ahead and tell us
Hello?
what you want us to remember.
Okay. But But one thing we have to remember is at the time they are not only occupying Central together with Mong Kok and Causeway Bay. And don't forget, at that time, a lot of protesters, they were reacted like crazy people, and they fought with the policemen, and I think everybody knows that after the period of time, Hong Kong was split into two color zones, yellow and blue.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you think the sentence will make it increasingly difficult for policemen in Hong Kong to do their job in the future?
Exactly. I think the answer is yes. And so we have to support the Hong Kong police force, and we urge the government to supply sufficient resources and to encourage and to raise the morale of the team.
And I understand, lastly but briefly, that you have sent a petition letter to the chief executive. What was the message in that, and what are you trying to achieve?
Yes, we presented a letter to our chief executive, Leung Chun-ying, yesterday afternoon, and to urge he used the authority to exercise according to the basic law of Hong Kong, Article 48, paragraph 12, to pardon the 7 policemen from jail. And so this is only our first step, and we hope that Leung Chun-ying will exercise his rights, and if he fails or he does not want to exercise this authority, I think the police supporters and a lot of people in Hong Kong will be feeling very upset, because it will further damage the morale of the police team.
Thank you very much, Lee Sing, convener of the Alliance in Support of the Police Force, from joining us in Hong Kong. Now, there has been much controversy over the length of the sentences handed down to these 7 police officers. There have also been many questions asked about the fact that the convicting judge was British, which some say that this case would not have been so controversial if the sentences had been handed down by a Chinese judge. But the law is the law. Whether or not you support the fact that Hong Kong basic law still allows foreign judges to preside in its courts, the fact is that they are legally allowed to do so. So let's wait for the final verdict. Indeed, if the 7 policemen decide to appeal for their sentence, and at the same time, we should also let the legal system in Hong Kong decide what the ultimate sentence should be. But lastly, many are asking the question of why foreign judges still make up the majority of judges in Hong Kong 20 years after its handover to China. For a long time, the US, as well as many other countries, have argued that China has full control over the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or DPRK, and should make greater efforts to deal with the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula. But in her response to overseas media, Fu Ying, the chairwoman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of China's National People's Congress, said China does not control any other country. To get more insight on this topic, we have Professor Wang Yiwei from the School of International Studies at Renmin University joining us today in the studio. Professor Wang, thank you very much for joining me today. First of all, let me ask you, how do we define China's relationship with the DPRK? Are we friends? Are we foes? Are we half friends, half foes?
Definitely it's not foe, it's a friend. But this friend based on the historic geography and relations. We don't think China control anybody, not control North Korea. This things by pass the back of the North Korea nuclear and missile problems to China. It's a responsibility, because if China can control North Korea, and then immediately dismantle the nuclear program and the missile defense, missile system. Why? Because it's, the nuclear test is only hundreds of miles away from China. So it's violent of the Chinese international security environment, and give the excuse for the start of missile defense system. And if we control, and there's no need for North Korea to go nuclear, because we can provide a nuclear umbrella for North Korea, like the US did for South Korea.
So indeed, I understand we have a historical friendship with that country. But at the same time, are we seeing the relationship changing over the recent years? For instance, often China is the last one on the list when the DPRK notifies the outside world that it has carried out a nuclear test or a missile test. Why is that?
Well, this is very complex relations. Since the end of the Korean War, that China probably provided most of the food and oil assistance to North Korea to make the government survival and keep the Communist Party in power, and also provide many of the financial assistance. Many of them even embodied and even consensual. So, because the North Korea lacks so much from the resources and the food from China. But this support, I think, this is humanitarian assistance. Without that, the North Korean people will suffer a lot from the humanitarian crisis. And but now I think China joined many sanctions, including cut the import from the coal, because it's coal, yeah, because it's the hard currency income, most of them for export and to China.
So indeed, China can do more. Is that the case, or?
Well, we can do more in this regard, but the nuclear program is not that China can do something, because the nuclear test, missile test, the eyes on United States. Because of the U.S. and its airlines, the threat to North Korea, so they cannot guarantee the security. So it's asymmetric to go to nuclear, which China definitely cannot provide a nuclear umbrella for North Korea. That's the reason.
So you're saying basically the lack of security reassurance from the United States is the fundamental reason why the DPRK wants to develop its nuclear program. Indeed, over the past few years, sanctions by the UN Security Council has failed to work at all, just as Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has said at the Munich Security Conference. Let's take a listen.
This negative circle should not continue, because the ultimate end result could be something that no one can bear. It's a situation where everyone loses.
So indeed, what Foreign Minister Wang Yi is saying is that by imposing more sanctions on the DPRK, it's not going to solve the problem. What can solve the problem then?
First, stop military exercises, the threat from the U.S. and its airlines to North Korea. At least the North Korea not feel safety and go back to the negotiation table. But so far, there's no diplomatic relation between North Korea and the United States. And then the Armistice Treaty is not a peace treaty. So they cannot guarantee from the international community that like China open reform to the outside world. So I think this is the crucial, this is the key to North Korea.
Are we seeing positive signs in developing towards that goal?
Maybe during the President Trump's period, because of the North Korea's ICBM. It's a really threat.
Intercontinental ballistic missile.
It's not just a threat to the U.S. airlines in South Korea, but also in Japan and in Guam, and maybe the homeland of the United States. So it's a very urgent and serious for the United States to negotiate with North Korea. In the past decade, there's just not on the agenda of the U.S. diplomatic issues. So that reason, North Korea nuclear issues and missile issues, so worse and worse.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think the outside world continuously call on China to exercise more influence, to give more pressure on the DPRK, or basically ask questions like, does China have control over the DPRK? What is the reason behind that?
As I said, this is pass that back. This is irresponsible. That China, everything what North Korea did, you should take the responsibility. Actually, China and North Korea is not airlines. We cannot control, we cannot influence in the security regard. If China can provide a nuclear umbrella for the North Korea, and then I think maybe it can solve this problem. But China has carried out its non-independent, it's independent foreign policy and non-alliance foreign policy.
Non-alliance.
So this is
what reasonable expectations can the outside world have on China in helping resolving the nuclear
issue? The Chinese role, I think, is like the six-party talks. To put all the stakeholders for negotiation and solve this problem peacefully. That if North Korea fail the extreme threat from outside, then maybe go to extreme. This is definitely is not good for China and other stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Professor Wang Yi from Renmin University. And you have been watching The Point here on CGTN. My last point is coming up right after this short break. For half a century, the two Koreas have been coexisting in a state of truce since the two sides have never signed an armistice agreement. And ever since then, there have been repeated calls from the West for China to so-called reining its neighbour. But in many ways, this misses the point. Yes, the vast majority of trade from the DPRK is with China, and just as in this case, with China blocking co-imports from the DPRK, a lot of economic damage can be inflicted by China. But is that going to make the DPRK change its mind about its nuclear program? That is still an open question. Surely the main dispute is between the US and the DPRK until they sit down and talk with one another. Whether it is, as Donald Trump suggested, over a hamburger, no lasting solution can be brokered. You have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xing, here on CGTN. Thank you for watching. I'll see you tomorrow at the same time.